And Max Snyder, the executive officer from the 5th Ranger Battalion, became executive officer of the Provisional Ranger Group. I'm using 3 books to keep my data correct, although in some instances they contradict each other slightly because they're different people's accounts of the same thing. The first one is a Time Life's book, one of the books they wrote on World War II, and this particular one is The Second Front. It is extremely well illustrated, and anyone who wishes to know something about the war and what happened would be well advised to read the books I'm mentioning. The second book is inevitably called D-Day, and it was published in 1994, so that's quite recent. It was written by Stephen Ambrose, and it's largely eyewitness accounts from the men who were there. The third book is Rangers in World War II, which I've just recently acquired. It's written by a Robert Black, who was a ranger. During the month of May in 1944, there were ships marshalling in practically every seaport in Britain, all the way up so far as Scotland, on the east and the west coasts. And the Leopold, of course, left Southampton and made its way to Portland Bill, which is near Weymouth on the south coast of England. The minesweepers would go across first. There were 255 of them, and their job was to sweep up lanes from the Isle of Wight through the Channel up to the transport anchoring area off the French coast. The mines they were after consisted of contact and antenna mines, some floating, many anchored, plus pressure mines planted on the bottom that exploded by a change in water pressure exerted by the hull of a ship going over them. These mines constituted the Germans' most effective and indeed the only, almost, naval defense. And the mines could be brutally effective. One of them caused the first Allied casualties in the invasion. At about 1700, or 5 o'clock in the afternoon on June the 5th, minesweeper of the United States, Osprey, hit a mine that blew a large hole in the forward engine room. Fires broke out, and at 6:15 in the evening, the ship had to be abandoned. It sank soon after with a loss of 6 men. The invasion of Europe by the Allied forces had the code name of Overlord. The landing part of the invasion, in which I was concerned, or in which my ship was used, was known as Operation Neptune. The Allied force numbered 2,876,000 men, over 4,000 ships and craft of different sizes, American and British were used. There were 12,000 Allied aircraft, and there were 45 Army divisions in reserve, ready for battle. 3 divisions of the British Second Army would land on the Allied left, going in over 3 beaches, codenamed Gold, Sword, and Juno. General Omar Bradley's American First Army would land on the right, and the two beaches for them were designated Omaha and Utah. Omaha, the 6,000-yard beach between Beerville and Colville, was to be the main landing area for the American forces. And this is where the American Rangers were to land. And of course, this is where the Leopold would be. The most important objective in the American sector was Point du Hoc. This natural fortress was a jutting point of land, a dagger point thrusting toward England. Here the flat farmland of Normandy ended in a sheer and often overhanging cliffs. Beneath these foreboding cliffs was a narrow, rocky, surf-pounded beach. Point du Hoc dominated the Omaha and Utah beaches where the Americans had to land. Masters of the use of artillery fire, the Germans positioned a battery of 6 155mm guns captured from the French on top of the cliff. Able to fire at ranges up to 25,000 yards, the guns could sweep both Omaha and Utah beaches and cover the approach lanes almost from the point where the landing craft would cast off from the troop-carrying ships. A reinforced concrete observation post was placed well forward on the point. The German forward observers could oversee both beaches and the sea. Barbed wire was placed across the top of the cliffs, and artillery shells were suspended in such a manner as to be exploded in the face of a cliff climber or dropped to explode on the beach. On top, a series of interlocking trenches and dugouts contained firing positions for machine guns and anti-aircraft guns. The elimination of these guns on Point du Hoc was the primary mission of the Ranger Group on D-Day. There is evidence that prior to the landing that the guns had been removed, but this still did not diminish the necessity for the mission. It was critical to the invasion that German artillery could not be allowed to fire from Point du Hoc, and it was possible to return the guns at any time. The plan was for Colonel Rudder to go in with his group and climb the cliffs and put the guns out of action. As simple as that. If he failed to do this, Max Snyder's group would take over. And if he received a signal from Rudder to come in, he would go into Point du Hoc and climb the cliffs. But if he failed to get a signal from Rudder, he was to land at Dog Green Beach at Omaha and then make his way overland with his battalion to Point du Hoc and put the guns out of action from that way. The Ranger Group came down from Dorchester in England to Weymouth and were embarked on the ships. And the ships that were used was HMS Prince Charles, HMS Amsterdam, HMS Ben McCree, HMS Prince Baudouin, and of course HMS Prince Leopold. On June the 3rd, the men were informed that D-Day would be June the 5th, and HR, the hour of landing, was to be 10 minutes past 6 in the morning. But, of course, we all know there was bad weather, and it was postponed until June the 6th. So it was about 4:30 in the afternoon on June the 5th that we sailed for France. And much of the cross-channel trip was rough. No problem to the Navy, of course, and we didn't really think it was rough at all. But the Rangers remembered that at 2 o'clock in the morning there was an air raid alert, which didn't come to anything, and that to breakfast or not was a man's choice. Hot coffee, hot cakes, and seasickness pills served as breakfast for many. The first ships that were involved in the landings in the Ranger side was the Prince Charles and the Ben McCree and the Amsterdam. And their boats had quite a rough time of it. The run into shore was made through heavy seas, and many of the men were violently sick. They could see the red glare of the rocket ships and the flashes of bombs landing on the Normandy coast as they went in. There was about a 4-foot chop on the sea, and the Germans didn't believe that a landing was possible in such rough water. Some of the men were drowned, and of course rescue craft moved in and pulled survivors that they could from the cold waters. Several of the craft were experiencing difficulty and filling up with water. They had too many men and too much ammunition and things being carried, so they were low in the water, and they sank, some of them. But most of them got through to the beach, and some of them were quite badly shut up from the moment they got anywhere near the beaches. They had a very rough time indeed. The Germans were waiting for them and had plenty of guns and ammunition, and it was quite a sad and sorry thing with many dead bodies floating in the shallow waters, and all gallant American men, in this area that I'm talking about, because they had the worst of it, the men who landed on Omaha. Just talking about Company C, whose commanding officer was Captain Garnson and Lieutenant Moody. They were hit by enemy mortar or direct artillery fire on the ramp of LCA 418 as they landed. 2 other explosions ripped the craft, and men tried to escape over the side, and heavily laden men fought to keep from drowning in deep water. Of the 68 Rangers in Company C of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, 19 were killed, including Sergeant Geldon, who died on his 3rd wedding anniversary. 13 Rangers were seriously wounded, and 5 were lightly wounded in crossing the almost 300 yards of exposed beach. Those who survived kept moving and crossed the beach. The wounded crawled behind them. Meanwhile, Rudder's Force A had not yet landed. As daylight revealed the shoreline, several Rangers recognized that the cliff point they were headed for was Point de la Percie, some 3 miles to the east of Point du Hoc. Currents, battle smoke, morning haze, and the tension and confusion of battle all contributed to the fact that many units along Omaha Beach were landing to the east of their planned objectives. Rudder's Force A Rangers were now headed for Point du Hoc. Valuable time had been lost. The naval supporting fire had been timed to lift at 6:25 a.m., 5 minutes before the planned Ranger touchdown on the beach at Point du Hoc. The error in direction made Force A over 30 minutes late. 30 minutes in which the Germans could reorganize and man their defenses. At the same time, landing craft containing Colonel Max Snyder from the Prince Leopold with the 5th Ranger Battalion and A and B companies of the 2nd Ranger were embarked and moving towards the shore in heavy seas. Snyder was waiting for a radio message or the sight of mortar-fired flares from Point du Hoc, which would signal him to make the follow-on landing.